On today's World Insight, WHO findings on COVID-19 after an open scientific mission. The facts from a respected zoologist in the WHO China team.
I think that it's possible that the cold chain from other countries plays a role. That needs to be looked at.
And travel guidelines to stay in may have halted the Spring Festival rush, but e-commerce and delivery services have bridged the geographic distance with loved ones. Will shifts towards the online economy remain post-pandemic? Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The WHO team has concluded its joint research with the Chinese colleagues in Wuhan. The research was highly anticipated as the world sought answers to the origin of COVID-19 virus. The joint team left no stone unturned, many say, as they visited the Huanan Seafood Market, Wuhan Jinyintan Hospital, and the Wuhan Virology Lab. Right before they left Wuhan, I spoke to Peter Daszak, a zoologist and a member of the WHO China research team. He explains what his team has ruled out and what still needs further research. Take a look. Peter, good to see you, finally.
Great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm very good. And you are up and running even in the middle of the night. I'm really impressed.
Well, we've been flat out now for months, so I'm just keeping going.
Let me ask you several questions. Many people have in mind. The report was very long and very professional, but to layman's ears, we want you to have some direct answers if possible. So Peter, is it a spillover from a lab?
The evidence says extremely unlikely. So, and that was a unanimous opinion on both the China and the WHO side. So I think that pretty much tells us it's not worth continuing that pathway of thought.
Secondly, what about the Huanan Seafood Market? Do we know now exactly what spread around the virus?
Yeah, we don't really know exactly what happened yet, but what we do know is there was a very significant event at the Huanan Seafood Market with a lot of infected people. There is evidence that the virus was all spreading in the community at a greater rate than we thought previously. So obviously the outbreak started and was already spreading by the time we got to Huanan. What's really important is that there's no evidence of substantial spread prior to December. So the event was then, it spread rapidly, and it kind of was an explosive event, and then it was discovered pretty quickly.
Did we find patient zero?
No, and we may never find patient zero. It could be an elderly person who died of pneumonia, and that might have been missed because people die of pneumonia, people get sick. So we may never get there, but we do know a lot more than we did 2 months ago.
How did they jump from animal to human?
Yeah, that's the really interesting question for me. And I, in this working group, we sort of split out into 3 sections, and I was the lead for the WHO team on animals and the environment. And I worked with my colleagues on the China side. I was very interested in this, and we don't know exactly, but there are some clues. One clue is that the market is bringing frozen products, meat, other products from around the world originally and from within China and within the region. Some of those products included meat from animals that we know have the capacity to be infected by coronaviruses. So there's a link,
like
there's
what
a
kind of animals?
Well, I mean, we think it's ferret badgers, for instance, rabbits, both of which we know could harbor coronaviruses without us knowing about it. But also the frozen products, from other outbreaks in China, that frozen products can transmit, can allow the virus to be spread.
Peter, on the other hand, many of the raw materials you're working with actually are coming from your colleagues here in China. They support you with evidence and also the clues and also the information you're looking for. But is there much trust between your team and the Chinese counterpart you're working with? What kind of degrees of trust is the appropriate level?
Yeah, it's a really good point you're making there. All of the evidence is coming from China team, not just some of it, all of it.
Because none of those evidence could be copied later, right? I mean, you have to collect it at the moment when it happened.
Yeah, you have to go out there and do the work. And China was in the middle of a terrible outbreak. So what the scientists did, there were Chinese scientists coming into Wuhan, giving up months of their lives to do this work. I mean, I have great respect for what happened here. We met with leaders of the community. We met with real people who'd lost relatives, quite moving and emotionally touching experiences. I think there's a sense in Wuhan that I felt of almost post-traumatic shock.
Yeah,
They've been through so much, and now they're getting blamed. And I think that the emotion is noticeable. So he would come in as foreigner to say, let's look at your data. Any scientist will tell you, when you've found something interesting and you want to publish it, you don't show it to other scientists because they're your competitors. Now, trust is critical. For me, it was not a problem. I happen to know many of the scientists on the other side because I've worked with Chinese scientists for 15 years, some of them very well. And we got on well. We had good, open, honest discussions, really got into every detail. But some of the other scientists who haven't been to China before, maybe a bit longer, but by the end of it, we've got really good friends, new friends made, new colleagues, and a really deeper understanding. There has been a lot of openness, a lot of transparency.
Now, Peter, one of your friends is Shi Zhengli. Madam Shi is the head of the Wuhan Institute for Virology. There were a lot of rumors about her, a lot of rumors about her institute, and you were speaking out, in fact, about what you have noticed and what's your analysis. Tell me more about that. At the end of the trip, what are in your mind?
You know, I first heard about the rumors, and I want to say they're more than rumors. They're some very nasty activity. I heard about this very early on in the outbreak, that our colleagues in China were being attacked. They were being accused of designing a virus and spreading it, and were getting death threats. And we wrote a letter to the Lancet, and a group of very important scientists that I know and that I talked to supported scientists in China who are fighting the outbreak. I mean, how outrageous that they're fighting an outbreak. They're being accused of causing an outbreak. Yeah. So for my mind, it's obvious to me that the work that Shi Zhengli has done for all of her career is both excellent science and for the public good, to help people to try and predict and prevent pandemics. And I work with her on exactly that, and I still do. We've both through tough times. I've had my own conspiracy attacks in the US that are still going on today, every day. But we stick to our mission and our goals to find the source of these pandemics and try and stop them. And Madam Shi is a powerful and strong person, as well as a great scientist and a good friend. So it was a very important moment to see her again in person, to sit down with her, with the head of the laboratory and the head of the Institute of Virology and the other people around, with the colleagues from WHO. And I think really importantly, the world needs to know, scientists who I don't know on the WHO team ask their own questions directly to the people at WIV about some of these very tough issues, these very sensitive issues. And that will be reported in the report. There will be a transcript. And they voted. They had an opinion on whether it was a likely scenario after they looked at all those data. Mm-hmm. I didn't speak until they'd made their opinion known, and the whole room discussed it. The whole room made their opinion known. Then I spoke, and it was a unanimous decision that this is an extremely unlikely event. So I do think that's a very significant finding. Some people will never support that, and they'll continue to promote these rumors and conspiracies. But these are scientists who know what they're doing, who've looked at a lab, who understand what goes on. And what we saw was a state-of-the-art facility doing good work.
When you say it was a unanimous vote, how did you guys vote? I want to know the situation then. And maybe our viewers also need to and deserve to know the situation, how people are expressing their ideas, how they took turn, and how would they voice a different opinion, and how that unanimous vote eventually was cast. What was going on there?
So we've been meeting in rooms here, conference rooms in this hotel, 3 rows back, a lot of people in a room. And we've been talking about every possible pathway this virus could have taken, from a bat to a human, whether through an intermediate host, whether through a cold chain, whether through a lab. And we got into, in those discussions, all the details and sort of debated what is the evidence for and what is the evidence against. There is evidence against. There's no data that show that SARS-CoV-2 was in any lab in the world prior to the outbreak. The closest relative is not the same virus. There's no evidence of unusual clusters of disease around the Wuhan lab or in the staff of the Wuhan lab. So we went through a whole series of bits of information like that, and eventually people then said, well, in my opinion, it is not highly likely, possible, or even unlikely. It's extremely unlikely. And other people around the room gave their opinion too. Every single person said extremely unlikely, including myself.
Some still believe that WHO has to prove itself and so-called correct its mistakes. By the way, that was a phrase used by some. I'm not sure whether there's much credibility in that phrase either. But Peter, how is this team being assembled?
Yeah.
And were there any information before you set out for Beijing, for China, that would consider as interesting regarding what likely to be the result of the research?
WHO has done this many times. They have a unit within WHO called the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, GOAN. And that group has investigated Ebola outbreaks, Nipah virus outbreaks. They investigated the original SARS outbreak. In fact, one of the members of this team was on the original SARS outbreak, Dominic Dwyer investigation. So they're used to doing this. And what they do is they have a list of experts that sign on and say, in the case of an emergency, I will volunteer my time to help if you need my help. There'll be veterinarians, there'll be medics, there'll be epidemiologists, lab managers. So they sent a message out to that group and said, do you want to volunteer for this task? They also then made a wider search for people outside of that group that have expertise. And, I think my expertise is pretty obvious. I've worked in China for 15 years on these very same viruses, coronaviruses from bats. I've worked with many of the people that need to be in the room to talk about that from China. So I'm kind of an obvious fit, but what they did is they pulled together a team of, for the people who volunteered, experts that made all the sides of the story fit together. They then wanted a team that would work well together, so the personality. And I've got to say, we are best friends, even after 28 days of lockdown. It's just been a really positive experience. Hard work. But that's how it works. That's how the WHO does their work. And I have intense respect for the WHO. WHO gets the same rumors that other scientists have been getting around this. They're not true. They're not real. It's an organization that has a limited budget that does really important, critical work to save people's lives. What could be more pure and important than that? And I think a very successful trip. The work will continue. We'll be meeting the minute we get back. I don't think it needs to prove itself any more than that, for sure.
Peter, what's the next stage of research? As we didn't find patient zero, we still don't know many of the crucial issues. I mean, it might take a very, very long time, as you may know, with your expertise, to know just a little bit more information in that regard. But what's the next step?
Well, the next step is to, first of all, we've got to produce a report so the world can see what we've done. In the meantime, we'll be continuing discussions with our colleagues and lining up the recommendations. We have ideas around the bat pathway. You know, do we need to go out and sample bats? Maybe not in China so much, but maybe in Southeast Asia, where even today there was a new virus discovered from bats that's close to SARS coronavirus 2. So do we need to trace back from the market to the suppliers of the market, the products that went in there, so we can see if they were contaminated or if the people were infected? And there's a cold chain hypothesis. You know, we know that that's controversial, but there is good evidence from the outbreaks in Beijing and Qingdao and Dalian that this cold chain plays a role. So that needs to be tested. Go out and find out more information. If there were early cases in other countries, let's validate the tests that were done, check the data, and do more investigation. So there's a whole series of recommendations that will now begin. The work will begin, and we'll hope to find out more. We've come up with some early clues that are promising and quite exciting. Now we need to follow the leads and go further back.
You've been doing research for a long time about One Health. Some also call it conservation medicine. Tell me more about, with this outbreak, COVID-19, how much new information and direction does it provide to your work and your research?
Well, One Health is the concept of, you know, the health of the environment, of the animals, and of the people are connected. Yeah. And if we just look at people's health and we don't think about animals and the environment, we may miss the key issue. SARS-CoV-2 clearly has an animal involvement because it probably comes from wildlife. It has an environmental involvement because it emerged through either some product supply chain, maybe through farms or through the travel network or the trade network. So we need to look at all of that and bring it all together. It's a true One Health project. But I just want to point out, you know, some of the things that China did are directly beneficial to conservation. On February the 24th, China proposed to ban the wildlife trade for food and to close down the farms that raise domesticated wildlife is a big, important move. It's good for conservation, it's good for our health, it's good for the environment. And I think it shows leadership. And I think that now we need to look at the greater issues around the wildlife trade, even for food that we think might be harmless, but could carry this hidden danger of a pandemic in other countries. So there's a lot we can do, there's a lot we need to do, but we have taken some very significant first steps with COVID, and I welcome that.
For further investigation, or shall I say, trace origin, what is the exact plan now in terms of geography?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a role to play in looking in other countries. First of all, if there's a bat origin to this virus, it's quite likely it's going to be in Southeast Asia. So we need to go and find that and find out what the risk of a new virus is coming from bats into people. I think that it's possible that the cold chain from other countries plays a role. That needs to be looked at. So tracing back from that Huanan market, where the products that were coming into it came from, and just looking to see if it's possible that viruses could persist that way. It may not be true, but let's find out. I don't know how far we'll need to go across the world to do that, but we do need to follow the evidence. And just like any trace back, go back and you test, then you go further back, and maybe you reach a dead end. But I think there are some really important leads from this study. We need to follow them. And the reason we need to do that is if we can find out why this virus emerged, we can stop. And it's a lot better to prevent these pandemics than go through the suffering that we've gone through with this.
I talked to Richard Hatchett from CEPI. I talked to Peter Piet, who co-discovered the Ebola virus, and many of them have been suggesting we are really in the danger of having a pandemic age, quote unquote, or pandemic time. Your take?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think this is debatable at all. Yeah. We've analyzed the trends in pandemics. We've analyzed the trends in new viruses coming out of wildlife and other animals, and they're rising year by year. We estimate there might be over 1 million viruses in wildlife that have the potential to infect us. So let's go out and find them. Let's get them, the sequences into a lab. Let's work on vaccines. Let's work with the communities around the world that are on the front line of pandemics, and that can include countries that China has good relationships with. we've talked about this before, a global virome project, an effort to understand what is out there on the planet that could become a risk. And that came up repeatedly from the China side, that we need to support these global efforts to really understand the risk.
You know, at the end of the day, no matter how thoroughly the research is, there would always be voices suspicious of the way you work, your relationship with the Chinese side, you know, whether the accurate or not the report, and whether further studies should be done. How are you going to face all of this? And probably personal attack, even more than you already experienced.
Well, you know, I face it every day. And what I do is I just know, I mean, I'm not a politician. I'm a scientist. I'm here to understand the world around us for a valuable purpose. So that's what I'm going to do. I mean, that's my job. It always has been. Before people started attacking me, I was doing this work. While they're attacking me, I will do this work. And after they continue attacking me, I will do this work. I leave China with a certain sadness, you know, when you work with colleagues like this for so long, you become, every time you leave a little bit of yourself there and you take a little bit with you. So I'm leaving with a certain sense of sadness, but a great sense of joy and pride that we did a good job,
yes,
that we did what we came out to do. And we met with everybody we wanted to meet with. So thank you for doing that, China. And we will now carry on our work, and I look forward to the next steps.
And thank you, Peter. All the team members that you have on the team, please express our great appreciation for their support and help in tracing the virus in the world to make ourselves safer, all of us. You're watching World Insight. Coming up, travel guidelines to stay in may have halted the Spring Festival rush, but e-commerce and delivery services have bridged the geographical distance with loved ones. Will shifts toward the online economy remain permanent post-pandemic? Stay tuned for more information about the Chinese economy. Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Spring Festival, as the Lunar Chinese New Year celebrations popularly known, is falling on this Friday. But with the worries over the pandemic, consumer spending during the festival will likely take a hit. So various stimulus measures are in place. For example, in Beijing, the capital city, some $1.5 million in digital currency test will be handed out during the festival. It's feeling the ongoing shift of Chinese consumer preferences toward e-commerce and online entertainment and education for over the past decade. The pandemic did accelerate the trend, proving to be a boom to companies that serve the stay-at-home economy. How deep and wide is the pandemic's impact on the Chinese holiday economy? Let's loop in our panelists. They will also have something to say about the future of the Chinese economy. About the economy in Beijing, Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from University of International Business and Economics. Also in Beijing, Xu Sitao, Chief Economist of Deloitte China. Last but not least, in Brussels, Daniel Grohl, member of the board and distinguished fellow at the Center for European Policy Studies. Let me ask you, though, about the holiday season. Now, with the Spring Festival holiday season, usually at this time, Chinese consumers spend in a big way. This time, though, out of precaution, not many people would travel, not as much as 1 billion people on the move. So, Xu Sitao, tell me more about what can we predict about this month, the month of February?
I think this month should be okay. First quarter this year is going to be way above double-digit economic growth rate. And of course, we're in the mid of the Chinese New Year, as you can see, and you still get usual traffic in Beijing, which is very different from what we have seen in past years. So that cannot be measured in terms of dollar and cents. But I would say most people, they take the view this is necessary, and because in order to protect greater goods, I think people are rather to celebrate the Chinese New Year where they are instead of their hometown.
Are you going to buy much during the festival yourself? You and your family?
I don't see any changes of consumption pattern, but
Really?
of course, pandemic has forced consumers to really accelerate their adoption of digital applications. So you try to buy things online.
Yeah, more people went dining out, right, during the ordinary years. This time, maybe not, especially during the New Year's Eve. The New Year's Eve dinner is extremely important for the Chinese, and it's one of the highest price tag usually for any restaurant. And this year, it's going to be quite different. And also, we have seen, the traveling plans people have, Mr. Xu. Earlier, it's anywhere in the world, be as big as your dream. However, this year, well, anywhere in the suburbs of the city you're living in. So it's a very different story, isn't it, Mr. Xu?
Yes. Well, I mean, everyone knows hospitality industry is being affected, but at least China is not Spain or Thailand. The economy is not that exposed to tourism. Some of the interesting changes we have seen, really, people who were born in the 90s or even late 90s, they are a lot more enthusiastic. So this is a so-called consumption upgrade of young Chinese consumers. That trend has been extremely pronounced.
What are they spending on?
Well, many hotels, they want to have a different experience. They got more free spirit. They are more willing to try new things. They are less frugal, they're more confident.
Professor Liu, have you ever have some new thoughts about your holiday plan?
Our university has high recommendation that without substantial legitimacy, you do not really leave Beijing. So I'm a very obedient citizen on the campus, so I have to stay.
Mr. Guo, I want to have the input from you first. You've been traveling to China frequently before the pandemic. Tell me more about the Chinese economy from your observation over the past year.
The Europeans can only be envious of the success of China, its high growth rates, and also how it has overcome the pandemic. And that is why actually Europe at this point in time, when its own economy is very weak, its own demand is very weak, is relying heavily on exporting more to the Chinese market, which is the only market in the world which is still expanding.
Well, Mr. Xu, your take.
The Chinese economy is clearly on a roll, and I very much echo the sentiment from our colleague in Belgium, mainly because consumers are extremely resilient, interest rates low, virus for practical purpose has been eradicated. Now, global recovery is gathering momentum. That's boding well for the Chinese economy. Again, with a large fiscal stimulus looming in the US, that's also boding well for the global recovery. So in a nutshell, the Chinese economy is likely to sustain its recovery strongly.
Wow. We have two panelists already blowing the horn, suggesting this is going to be big time for Chinese economy. Mr. Liu, Professor, what do you think?
Well, in addition to the optimism expressed by our two guests, I should say that Chinese economy is also experiencing structural changes. One, of course, is because of the impact of the pandemic, where the tourism, hospitality industry, and all human-intensive industries are being adversely affected, which is taking the same pattern as globally. And the other is the artificial or politically engineered changes that is going on. We are shifting from a more of a efficiency-driven and a scope-driven economy now into a more innovation-driven economy. And yes, we are looking at the brighter side of the picture, but in the meantime, there are a lot of hurdles in the innovation process because companies may not really be able to cope with the development trends, so therefore they fall out.
Looking up from afar, will the service job and the labor job be much impact in the Chinese economy as a result of the pandemic that is still going on?
Actually, in China, little might change because the virus has been eradicated, and in a year or so, people will feel confident to travel again. But we have to keep in mind the travel and leisure industry within China is really of secondary importance. And that's different elsewhere, as was said already, Thailand, Spain, and so on, very much depend on the travelers for their economy. And therefore, they made a mistake. They opened too early.
Yeah.
And that's why we still have the virus in Europe. So I think the Chinese are doing well, staying at home this time so that they can travel again tomorrow.
But Mr. Guo, here's the question. If we don't open our national border, of course, at the time of being safe, then there's going to be huge problems because right now we have enough money, everywhere in the world almost have enough money that we can consume right now at a time of crisis. But this crisis, if it continues, 1 year, even 2 years, that's going to have a huge dampening effect on the global economy. Even China blossom on its own for 1 year, it doesn't mean that it would be able to do so if it lasts 2 years or 3 years.
It is true that, of course, China also depends on a well-functioning world economy. If there's no growth abroad, it's more difficult for China to grow. But we have to keep in mind there's, so to speak, two economies.
Yeah.
There's the manufacturing sector, trade in goods, which is actually doing fine, which is coming back. And even in Europe, industry is doing well. So I think trade will actually blossom this year. There will be no problems in that direction. It's just the very local services sector, which is much more important in parts of Europe, which will have difficulties for some time. But I think if you keep the borders open for goods, which they are, then both China and the rest of the world can at least participate in strong growth in manufacturing and trade.
Professor Liu, there are various occasions in which China is trying to showcase to the rest of the world that it is still opening up and probably opening up even more. And there are buying and purchasing from the rest of the world, the China Shanghai Import Expo, and you are going to see Hainan's Expo later this year, Consumption Expo that's called. But will this engine work? To what extent can China's engine work for the rest of the world?
Well, China continues to contribute to the larger share of the global growth, and we have been contributing to the added growth by roughly 30%. And now with the pandemic looming large, we are able to contribute more because we are able to manage it under better control. But in the meantime, China continues to enjoy the trade surplus with over 100 countries. So therefore, China wanted to show it's not really Chinese intention to enlarge such sort of trade gap. So therefore, over the past few years, we have stepped up the imports from the most of the trading partners, and particularly also we are looking at Africa and Latin America, where we are also offering the a kind of general preferential treatment and even zero tariff for the imports of both bulk material and also manufactured products. And that's also part of the country's global responsibility that China is trying to paint.
So now, one of the biggest things about the Chinese economy is the platform economy. That's been built by some of the biggest tech companies over the past decade. We know, Mr. Xu, the latest guideline has been issued regarding the practices on the platform economy, anti-monopoly measures particularly. How are we going to see the prospect of these platforms in the latter half of this year? How is it likely to have an impact on the growth and also the direction of the Chinese economy?
All these platforms are very powerful. In fact, if we look at them globally, only China and United States have such platforms because of the size of the market.
Yeah.
In China, of course, consumers are more willing to embrace them because of less concern with the privacy. However, the concern is for some of these platforms, they may compete with subsidies from other business units. So this is so-called unfair competition.
Right.
Now, for most of the mom and pop shops, clearly they cannot compete with platforms.
Mr. Guo, we see that thing going on, legislations against the monopoly, also inside Europe. Of course, it might not be about the European platforms, but rather about American platforms operating in Europe. How do you see, new guidelines and new measures, new policies these days going on in different parts of the world toward the platform economy? In China's case, where is it?
It's a really difficult, that's really a difficult problem for European policymakers, because there's a popular demand to do something about the power of the American platforms. But at the same time, they're indispensable for the functioning of the European economy, and they're indispensable for many consumers. And the consumers right now are not paying anything. They're paying with their data. And European regulators will have to be very careful not to deprive European consumers of the benefits of the platform, but at the same time to rein in their powers. So for the time being, we're talking about very small taxes on digital transactions, which might be coming. But I don't think that European regulators can go much further for the simple reason that there's no European platform.
Do the Europeans need to have a platform of its own?
I think it would be nice if one could have one, but unfortunately there you need a European Zuckerberg, a European entrepreneur, and you will need an integrated European market. And so far we don't have really, in that sense, an integrated market, because in Germany the consumer protection measures are a little bit different from France and from Italy.
Yeah.
All the business conditions are a little bit different. And therefore, it's very difficult to have a pan-European entrepreneur of the kind you have either in China or in the United States.
Professor Liu, what about the platform economy? It's been so ingrained in the Chinese economic momentum now. But at the same time, anti-monopoly is a big thing that you see around the world. So what is the degree to do the job? That would be a very tricky question.
This type of innovation is really due to the deregulation process, but yes, it's market driven. Look at the shared biking system by the Beijing municipality. People do not really pay attention to it, but shares bikes, run by private firms are really thriving despite of the reshuffling of different type of ownership. So therefore, we should be grateful to the convenience and also low cost offered by those private platforms. But of course, in the meantime, when they grow large enough and when they are really there to form a sort of monopoly or oligopoly, the government will have to do something to tame them, but to eliminate them and to have a dramatic shift of the policy towards and even public opinion towards the creators and managers of the platform is really not fair enough.
Well, my final question for all of you, what is really driving now the Chinese economy, particularly now? Professor Xu, Mr. Xu.
I would say young consumers.
As simple as that. You ruled all of us out. Is that what you're trying to say?
Younger consumers, those who were born in late 80s or 90s.
Okay. We see a very flexible economist. Thank you. Mr. Guo, what's your take? What's going to drive the Chinese economy? What is really driving the Chinese economy?
I think my colleague is right. It used to be that the Chinese economy was driven by investment, especially heavy infrastructure investment. And that should be declining now. And it's the younger consumers who should splurge a bit. And if they can do that, then they can usher a new period of consumption-driven growth.
If you conquer the young consumers, you conquer the world, as they say. Huh? Now, Professor Liu?
I would identify two major fundamentals. One is the continued infrastructure development. Now we call it new infrastructure development, from roads and ports now into the telecommunication system.
Yeah.
And the other is the continued urbanization process, which generates consumption and shift also the industrial structure. And the third is the anchor as Chinese industrial cluster that are there to be highly competitive. So therefore, it's really the most attractive part to global investment and the global traders.
All right. For now, I want to thank the three of you joining us, and I want to say Happy Chinese Lunar New Year to every one of you and your families. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching, and bye for now. Happy Chinese New Year.